Good evening, and I want to welcome the audience in the room as well as here at the Iowa City Public Library, and those of you who are watching the lecture live streaming on the library's YouTube channel. We are a small group tonight, and I think part of that is at least due to the fact that the League had another function last night, a candidate forum for school board candidates, and it was very well attended. So, you know, doing two League events in 1 week is a bit of a stretch. So, pumping the brakes on government surveillance, or as I see up there, protect our privacy, stop government surveillance, is a public education program organized by the Johnson County League of Women Voters and co-sponsored by the Iowa City Public Library, which provides this wonderful meeting space, and an outstanding staff who live stream our programs and then record them for rebroadcast. Our other co-sponsor for tonight's program is the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights, a division of the College of Law, which for 25 years now has been teaching about and advocating for human rights through collaborative events and innovative programs. Tonight's speakers are with the American Civil Liberties Union of Iowa. They are Becca Eastwood, who is Deputy Policy Director, seated right here, and Erica Dubin-Bars, Community Engagement Manager. First, a little bit about the ACLU of Iowa. It was founded in 1935 as the Iowa Civil Liberties Union. Edward S. Allen, a math professor at Iowa State University, is credited with marshaling a group of concerned citizens who established this state affiliate. In its very first year, the ICLU scored a legislative victory that, 90 years later, still resonates in the current political climate. In February 1935, State Representative Burke Hickenlooper introduced a bill that would have required all Iowa teachers to sign a loyalty oath. This was one of many such bills introduced at the state level during the 1930s. It was promoted as a method to somehow ferret out communist sympathizers. And we all know how long that effort lasted. The ICLU, however, mounted an effort to rouse public awareness, and as a result, the bill died in committee. Since then, the ACLU of Iowa, the name was changed in 2006, has defended workers' right to unionize, sued to end racial discrimination, lobbied to abolish the death penalty, guarded freedom of expression, fought to legalize same-sex marriage, championed warrantless eavesdropping on cordless telephone calls, and work to protect many other civil rights. Tonight, we are going to learn more about the increasing use of government surveillance in Iowa and steps that we can take to protect our right to privacy. Becca Eastwood has a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in public policy. Prior to joining the ACLU, she worked as a lobbyist and organizer for faith-based organizations in Washington, D.C. She is originally from Decorah, but one of the side benefits of being deputy policy director is that she gets to travel all around the state. She is still amazed by all that she has learned and continues to learn about Iowa. One of her favorite things to do is she and Erica travel around the state talking to Iowans, as they are doing this evening, is to check out the local public library wherever they go. And here we are in the public library. Erica Dubin-Bars grew up in LaPorte City, a little bit south of Waterloo. Prior to working with the ACLU, she worked to advocate for the rights of LGBTQ Iowans. Erica joined the ACLU of Iowa 5 years ago and enjoys meeting and collaborating with people across the state to make Iowa a more just place. As community engagement manager, Erica works to educate Iowans about their rights under state and federal law, advocate for civil liberties, and provide opportunities for people to meet one another and work together on ACLU issues. The format tonight will be the usual. Becca and Erica will speak for 45 or 50 minutes and then take questions and comments from the audience, both those who are in the audience here and those who are watching from at home. So with that, I am going to turn the floor over to Becca and Erica, and then Becca.
Thank you so much. Like she said, my name is Erica Dubenbars, and this is Becca Eastwood. We are really excited to be here tonight and want to thank the League of Women Voters for having us. Tonight, want to talk to you a little bit about government surveillance, tactics we've been seeing over the past few years really ramp up in Iowa. But first, want to tell you just a little bit about the ACLU, although I can only build a little bit on what has already been said. Then just want to talk a little bit about what are your privacy rights and where those come from under our current legal system to gain a little more understanding there, and why they're so important and why the threat that surveillance poses is so dire. We'll then talk a little bit about how surveillance technology does impact those privacy rights, and specifically shift to talking about a technology that we've really seen grow a lot over the past few years in Iowa, which are automatic license plate reader cameras. We'll talk a little bit about those and what makes them so insidious, and what we can do to stop them. You'll see here, protect our privacy, stop government surveillance. That's our new advocacy campaign, trying to curb and pump the brakes on the use of automatic license plate readers in Iowa. So at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about this campaign and how you can get involved. And then we'll, of course, have time for questions at the end as well. So basic information about the ACLU. So ACLU is an acronym, stands for American Civil Liberties Union, and our mission is to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties that are guaranteed to every person in this country by the Constitution and laws of the United States. We know that the US Constitution and the Bill of Rights are really aspirations for the kind of society that we want to be, but we also know that for much of our country's history, we have really failed as a nation to fulfill those promises for entire groups of people. And so here at the ACLU, our mission is really to try and realize this promise that the Constitution makes for every single person in our country and really expand the reach of the rights that the Constitution guarantees. We strive to be a watchdog for principles of freedom and equality in our society. And when we say we the people, we mean all of the people. Just a little bit about some of the nuts and bolts of how the ACLU works. So there is a national ACLU, and then there are also what we call affiliate ACLU organizations. There are ACLUs operating in all 50 states and Puerto Rico, Guam, and Washington, D.C. The national ACLU was founded in 1920, and so for over a century has really strived to be the nation's guardian of liberty and has been involved in many of the most famous and landmark Supreme Court cases and legal battles for justice throughout our country's history. The ACLU of Iowa specifically, as was mentioned earlier, founded in 1935. I also want to add in the plug that we were really the first affiliate of the ACLU that was founded in the middle of the country. Everywhere else that had an ACLU at that point was on the coast. So we like to say we really brought the ACLU's work into the heartland and are excited to see how it's grown since then. And we are a private and nonpartisan organization. The work that we do tends to fall into three main buckets. The first of which I think people tend to be most familiar with when they think of the ACLU is our legal work. I do want to throw a question to the audience. I don't know who has the handheld mic right now because I know that we are wanting to use that to make sure folks on the live stream can hear us. But does anyone recognize the people in this picture? Oh, sorry, can you wait for the mic?
Two teenagers in Des Moines.
That's correct. Do you know their names?
Tinker.
That's right. Yes. This is Mary Beth and John Tinker. So these two teens are the plaintiffs in probably the ACLU of Iowa's most famous legal case, and that still is widely impactful today. Tinker v. Des Moines is the name of the case. So Mary Beth and John went to school in Des Moines at Des Moines Public Schools, and in order to protest the Vietnam War, wore these black armbands with peace symbols on them to school. And the school tried to punish them for that and said, you can't do this at school. And they came to us and said, we feel like our free speech rights are being violated here. And we agreed. So we sued. And now that worked its way all the way up to the federal Supreme Court, and the federal Supreme Court agreed with us that their free speech rights were being violated by the school, and it really established free speech rights for students on a national scale that is still very impactful to this day. If you've ever heard the phrase, students do not lose their free speech rights at the schoolhouse gate, that this case is where that phrase comes from. So that's just one example of some of the legal work that the ACLU of Iowa does. We continue to take what we call impact litigation cases that have the potential to really guarantee rights and liberties for groups of Iowans. Second bucket of work is our legislative and policy work. We do a lot of work at the Iowa legislature during legislative session and not during legislative session to really promote bills and laws that are good for Iowan civil liberties and civil rights and try to prevent bad bills from passing. And the third bucket is where Becca and I tend to live most of the time, is our community engagement and public education and advocacy work. So we travel and do Zooms all across the state, making sure that people know what their rights are in a variety of scenarios and also have more information about some of the issues that the ACLU works on, like surveillance and privacy, to make sure that people feel empowered to be able to talk to their elected officials and participate in their own government and be able to speak out for civil and human rights themselves. So now I am going to pass it over to Becca to talk a little bit about why we are talking about privacy and surveillance specifically today. Yep.
So originally I was going to start with, I'm so excited to talk to you about government surveillance tonight, but that felt like the wrong word to use. So if anyone has a recommendation for a different one, I am all ears, but you know what I mean. So the ACLU has long worked at the intersection of privacy, surveillance, and civil liberties. And our goal in this work is really to expand your right to privacy, to increase the control you have over your information, and to make sure that your civil liberties are enhanced by technological innovation instead of threatened by them. So why this issue? Why are we talking about this now? We know that freedom from unreasonable government spying is a foundation of liberty in our country. Our Constitution demands that the government be accountable and transparent to the people, not the other way around. So that's in part because we know that privacy isn't about secrecy, it's about the ability to control your own life. But privacy today faces incredibly huge threats from a growing surveillance apparatus that's often justified in the name of security or safety. I'm sure folks have heard about, the balance of liberty and security. I think there's a famous quote by someone about that. So we want security and safety, right? Those are good things. We want those things. Government surveillance, however, does not necessarily equal safety, especially if you are the one that the government is trying to surveil in order to track and target. So why are we talking about this issue now? Our digital footprint is constantly growing, and it contains data about some of the most intimate aspects of our life, like our communications, our whereabouts, our online searches, our purchases, our medical histories. When city, state, and federal governments have easy access to that information, we're losing more than just privacy and control over that information. Our free speech, our security, and our equality suffer as well. Surveillance technology has outpaced regulation and safeguards, meaning the potential for privacy violations is huge. Companies and government agencies are deploying new privacy invasive technology often before we know that it exists, and certainly before we've consented to its use on us or in our communities. At the same time as we're seeing, our digital footprint increasing, as we're seeing surveillance tools increasing in number and in capacity, we're also watching the weaponization of our government against our civil liberties and civil rights. So we've seen this escalation of abuses of power, of disregard for things like due process or free speech, and this really turbocharged racism and discrimination that is being oftentimes enabled by increased surveillance. If we don't have privacy, especially digital privacy in this day and age, that feeds authoritarianism. If we don't have spaces where we can question the government without fearing that we're being watched, that props up authoritarianism. It's very hard to have a free society with no private space in which we're under constant surveillance and everything we're saying or we're doing is being monitored or recorded or stored somewhere. None of these dynamics are new, but we're seeing them deployed at this massive scale. So some of the situations that we're seeing now are, for example, in New Orleans, where earlier this year it was discovered that the police department was secretly using real-time facial recognition tools to track people in their own city and arrest them. And this was happening without public oversight. We're seeing Border Patrol agents searching people's phones as they come back into the country. We're seeing the federal government consolidating all of our data into one place. So all of these are incredibly concerning. And like Erica mentioned, we're going to talk about one specific technology that's being used here in Iowa. So I'm going to back up. Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to back up a second and talk about where our privacy rights come from. So there's no explicit right to privacy named in the Constitution. However, the concept of privacy and your right to it come from a number of places, both in the Constitution and in federal and state law. So the concept of privacy rights existed earlier than this, but there was a famous quote from Griswold v. Connecticut, which is the Supreme Court case that overturned the ban on married couples using contraception. And the justice who wrote the majority opinion in that described it as an implied right to privacy. So even though the Constitution doesn't specifically mention it, other rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution make clear that the right to privacy exists. And he names the first, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the ninth. I'm not going to do a pop quiz on what all of those amendments are. If you want, the ACLU has little pocket constitutions, so you yourself can become an expert. But those are the rights that he named. And because we're talking about government surveillance specifically today, we're really going to zero in on the Fourth Amendment. So I will ask if folks are familiar with the Fourth Amendment. We can just do a raise hand. You don't count. Okay. Awesome, okay. So this is great because then I can do my spiel. So the Fourth Amendment protects us from what are called unreasonable searches and seizures. Yeah, so think about like a police officer showing up at your house who is, an agent of the government and saying, I want to come inside to poke around because I feel like it. That's not allowed because we have the Fourth Amendment. So they have to get a warrant in order to be able to come into your home. So the Fourth Amendment really, I was so proud of myself for this little graphic, y'all. It really helps preserve that balance of power between the people and the government. So it is in this day and age, the Fourth Amendment has really evolved in what it applies to. I mean, you think about, when the Constitution, when the Bill of Rights was written, it was applying to the papers in your home and physical places like that. And now the Fourth Amendment has had to expand its reach because our information is in so many different locations. There are lots of things tracking us these days. And so what do you need a warrant to be able to do a search for? That question is really evolving as technology is evolving. So the ACLU really wants to reduce the asymmetry that we're seeing as surveillance technology increases and grows in its capacity, and how we're protected, how our information is protected. So I have a couple questions for thought. I promise we don't need the mic for this. The first one, so a lot of us take actions every day that show that we care about privacy, even if we don't realize that we're doing that. So I want to ask, how many folks use curtains in your home? Me as well. How many use passwords on your accounts? Yeah. Oh, bonus, how many use password trackers for your passwords? Couple of people? I'd really recommend it. How many use Signal or other encrypted messaging? Couple folks? Yep. Okay. So I think it's obvious that we've got some folks that care about privacy in the room tonight. And these are, basic level questions, right? These are pretty basic examples. But any violation that comes to our privacy has really far-reaching consequences. And it might not feel as immediate as someone looking in your blinds at home, right? It may not feel as intrusive as that in the moment, but it has just as dire, potentially even more dire consequences. So the issue of government surveillance actually intersects with a lot of ACLU issues. So, for example, the First Amendment. Government surveillance can chill your First Amendment rights by tracking you if you attend a protest, by monitoring what you're saying online and taking action against you because of it. It impacts immigrants' rights. We're increasingly seeing surveillance tools being used to track down people for detainment, for deportation. Impacts LGBTQ rights. There's examples right here in Iowa of surveillance tools being used to target folks for exercising their First Amendment rights in defense of trans rights. Racial justice, it probably comes as no surprise that surveillance tools like cameras, drones, gunshot detection systems are installed often most heavily in communities of color, which then exacerbates already existing law enforcement disparities. And reproductive freedom, which we're going to go into in a second. So these surveillance practices enable and help sustain sometimes things like racial profiling, mass incarceration, abusive immigration practices, religious discrimination. And so if we're able to put a check on government surveillance, if we're able to balance that, that scale, then we're able to strengthen Iowans' ability to exercise all of these other rights. So that gets us to why we're talking about government surveillance here in Iowa specifically. Why is it a big deal here? So right now in Iowa and across the country, we're not unique in this. There's a specific type of surveillance technology that is just exploding in use without the accompanying regulation or accountability that's necessary to balance. And they're called automated license plate readers. So I'm curious if anyone's heard of automated license plate readers. Just raise your hand. Yeah, okay. All right, so we're working with a pretty well-informed group here. We're going to talk a little bit about what they do specifically and why that is of concern to the ACLU. So you can see the image right here, that is an automated license plate reader. I actually took this photograph around the corner from my house. And once you know what they look like, which it sounds like a lot of you already do know, but once you know what they look like, I promise you, you're going to start seeing them pop up everywhere. So they've got this solar panel on top, they're solar powered, and you can kind of see it. There's a sort of black oblong camera underneath it. They are often freestanding like this, but can also be attached to like a street light, or they can be attached to a law enforcement vehicle, so they can be mobile and stationed in different places. So they are, like I said, mobile or stationary, computer-controlled camera systems. And what they do is automatically capture all license plate numbers that come into view. So this can include photos of your vehicle. It can sometimes include driver and passengers. It definitely includes the date, time, and location of that license plate scan every time you are driving by this ALPR. So think of it like the government is placing a location tracker on your car to monitor your movements just in case. What you see is the camera. That's what you see when you're driving down the road. Yeah, and I promise you, you'll start seeing them. What you don't see is the database behind the camera. So every scan that is done by an ALPR is then uploaded and stored in a central database. And every person, every entity, every government agency that has an ALPR contract has access to that database. And we know that vehicle location can show a really personal picture of your life. Think about where you drive. You drive to your doctor's office. You drive to a protest. You drive to a candidate forum. You drive to, your church. Maybe you're driving to a gun show. Who knows? But that, in the aggregate, can really paint a picture about your life, which is then stored in this central database. So ALPRs have actually been around for a while, but they have really ramped up in both number and what they're capable of doing now. So, and that's happened really over the past 6 or 7 years. For example, there is a company called Flock Safety, which installs and maintains these cameras and that central database. And over the past couple of years, they have expanded dramatically in the ALPR world. So there's a couple of different companies that are players here, but Flock is by far the biggest. And they really have the corner of the market on the central database here. And so in Iowa, almost all of the contracts that are being signed now for ALPRs are being signed with Flock Safety. So, what do ALPRs do? Like I said, they automatically record the images of license plates and more. So oftentimes identifying characteristics of your vehicle. It could be a bumper sticker, scratch along the side of your car, things like that. And then it checks those images against what are called hot lists in real time. So those hot lists can be things like the National Crime Information Center, which is maintained by the FBI. That's often used for missing persons alerts and stolen cars. So it's checking your license plate against those hot lists in real time. Some jurisdictions say that a hot list alert is not enough of a justification to stop a car that has pinged on the hot list, but not all, by far, not all of them say that, which has led to wrongful stops of vehicles, and we'll actually talk about that in a second. But I want to put this in context. So an extremely small percentage of the cars that are scanned actually ping on those hot lists or are connected to any alerts of wrongdoing, right? So that means that the vast majority of people who are driving past these cameras and whose cars are being recorded are not showing up on these hot lists. For example, there is an organization called the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which if you're interested in learning more about this, highly recommend. They did a study of 63 agencies that use ALPRs in California, and those agencies had a combined number of 840 million scans over the period of 2018 to 2019. And of those 840 million scans, 0.05% of those pinged on a hot list. So what's happening at the same time is that all of that data in those scans is being collected and stored. And that is the second thing that ALPR cameras do. They store that data to allow for after-the-fact searches. So the default contract, or the default amount of time is about 30 days that that data is retained, although it does vary widely around the country. For example, in New Hampshire, they have a law where the data is automatically deleted after 3 minutes. So for 30 days, your sensitive location information that a police department has not found relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation or civil action, that is being retained. Data like that that is being collected does not belong in a government database, let alone a database that is maintained by a private for-profit vendor. And critically, any government agency that has, for example, a flock contract, and even ones that don't, which we'll talk about in a second, can search this data. So your privacy is essentially at the mercy of any police officer with access to a flock safety login. It doesn't have to be in Iowa, all across the country. And we believe that outsourcing that type of broad mass data collection really undermines democratic accountability. Because where does the accountability come in if that's a third-party private vendor that is holding that information? So I also want to talk about what ALPRs don't do. They do not operate like automated traffic enforcement cameras. And we get this question a lot of, we're talking to people about ALPRs and they say, oh, I hate those things. They catch me every time I'm speeding. Those are not the same thing. So things like red light cameras or speed cameras, they're triggered by a violation, like you're speeding. ALPR cameras are just taking pictures of your license plate no matter what. The trigger is that you are driving past it, and your location and the time that you were driving past it and your license plate number, and potentially you in the vehicle or whoever's driving is all captured by that scan. There is also no warrant requirement for a search. So typically, we talked about this before, right? For law enforcement to carry out a search, they need to obtain a warrant based on probable cause. The idea being that there is a neutral arbiter of whether that search is necessary. There is no warrant requirement for searching this database, meaning that someone can perform a search on your whereabouts for any reason. And that is very concerning to us because we believe that that throws that balance out of whack. Finally, I promise you I didn't forget to finish this slide. I put these question marks here because we literally don't know what ALPRs don't do. Their capacity is constantly expanding with little to no guardrails. For example, they're moving into surveillance video instead of just scans. Also, and very concerningly, there's an update that will allow customers to use the system to actually generate suspicion versus just to investigate suspicion. So, before you would need to have external information that says, okay, I need to go find where this person has driven over the past however many days or whatever. This update uses AI algorithms that we don't know about, we don't see because it's a private company, to analyze the location scan data to actually detect patterns of suspicious activity. So like your car showed up on scans in the same place as a car that is under suspicion for burglary or something, and it can generate suspicion because you were in the same location for 3 days in a row or something like that. So that's why the question marks are there, because it's constantly changing what the capability of these cameras is. So I wanted to talk about the fact that the way that this system is built and is used is ripe for mistakes, for misuse, and for abuse. So I wanted to show a couple of examples. The first speaks to the pervasiveness of these cameras. So there is a lawsuit right now in Norfolk, Virginia, that is challenging the city's ALPR usage. And as part of that lawsuit, information came out about the two plaintiffs in that case, one of which, as you can see here, was tracked 526 times over a period of 4 months. So that averages to about 4 times a day that this person was being scanned on these ALPR readers or cameras. The other plaintiff was tracked 849 times in that same time period, which is 6 times a day, on average 6 times a day, that your location data is being scanned and stored in this central database. There are a couple of really prominent examples of mistakes. So in this situation in Colorado in 2020, police had detained and handcuffed a black mother and her kids after their ALPR system misidentified their car as stolen, and no one had verified whether it was the correct car. There's also, I'm gonna go back for a second. In Kansas in 2022, a police officer used the system to stalk his estranged wife. And then back in May, again, Electronic Frontier Foundation, doing great work, found out that a police officer in Texas had used the ALPR network to track down a woman who had obtained an abortion and used 83,000 cameras to do so. But there's actually more that has come out about this case. It was for the explicit purpose of, they called it a death investigation. And it was about 2 weeks after the abortion had occurred. So that's an incredibly scary example. If you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to read about it. Like I said, more information has come out about that case just in the last 2 weeks probably. Additionally, a lot of reports have come out that ICE has also used the ALPR database to track people for deportation. This can happen through just informal partnerships. So, calling up the local police department and saying, hey, can you help me out? I'm looking for this person. There was an instance where someone's login information was shared with ICE so that they could log in themselves. So the human workarounds at all levels of this result in situations like this. ICE is not a flock customer. They also had an agreement with Customs and Border Protection, and actually more news came out about this just today. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon has been doing an investigation into flock safety, specifically in Oregon as well, and found that in addition to CBP, also Secret Service, ICE's HSI division, and NCIS, I think, also had access to the flock safety database. They've since ended their partnership with CBP, but really only after it came out that that partnership existed, and they received a lot of pushback on that. So why are we talking about ALPRs here in Iowa? Over the past 3 to 4 years, I would say, there's been a steady stream of Iowa cities that have acquired ALPR systems. For example, Flock, this company, is heavily marketing these camera systems across the state and accounts for the vast majority of the new contracts that we're seeing. Many cities in Iowa have already signed ALPR contracts and used the camera system. Many of those contracts were signed without potentially votes from the city council, without residents knowing about it, without that accountability and oversight. Every single time a city signs a contract with Flock, we, the residents of those cities, are essentially paying to have our civil liberties and privacy rights violated. The cameras aren't the commodity here. We are the commodity. Our data is the commodity here. So I want to be really clear. What's happening is that cities are signing contracts with a private for-profit vendor that enable warrantless surveillance with limited oversight and next to no regulation. So, on that note, we have been compiling a list of cities across the state that do have ALPR contracts. Not all of them Flock, but like I said, the majority are. And this map is being updated as we go. There have been about 3 cities in Iowa who have signed contracts in the last 2 months. So this map is in flux. Part of the challenge is finding publicly available information about these contracts and whether cities have signed them, et cetera. Another great tool, if you're interested, is called dflock.me, and that shows you the actual location of cameras. So if you see a camera as you're driving around, et cetera, you note it's at the corner of Lynn and what's across street? Any of those, yes. Then you can go to dflock.me and you can log that camera location yourself. So that's a really great tool. So I want to highlight a couple of examples here in Iowa because pushback is mounting. Shout out to anyone who was involved in Coralville as Coralville was going through the process of deciding on their ALPR camera systems. The community really came together and spoke out and put a lot of pressure on the city council after they had discovered that this contract had been signed, but before the cameras had been installed. As I understand it, the city council has decided to move forward with installing the cameras. However, we hope that this is not the last gasp in Coralville, so stay tuned. But I wanted to highlight that because it was a just incredible example of folks really stepping up and saying, the risk is too big. We do not need these here and we don't want them. Of course, all of that happened after the contract was actually signed. I also wanted to highlight the example of Clear Lake. So Clear Lake is one of the cities that also very recently signed a contract with Flock. I will say for Clear Lake, their city council did vote on the contract. But I want to point out, I don't know if you can read it, in the bottom tagline, it says automatic license plate readers will be used to enhance public safety. And that is the narrative that is being pushed about ALPRs, is that they are there, they support law enforcement, they enable them to do their jobs, they're here to help public safety. And I want to take a step back and ask some of those core questions of public safety for who, and is that actually the case, and has that been proven? There are definitely anecdotal stories out there of ALPRs being used to help find a missing person. You might have seen headlines about that type of example, or find a stolen car. To date, however, there has not been systematic study of the actual efficacy of ALPRs. And as they are currently being designed, being marketed, and being used, they bring this massive expansion of dragnet surveillance, but don't bring the accompanying public safety benefits. So that balance that we're talking about before is thrown out of whack. So I want to talk about some of the growing momentum nationally against ALPR growth. There's a really fascinating example in Evanston, Illinois. So Evanston decided that they wanted to cancel their Flock contract. They didn't want to have the ALPRs there anymore. Flock removes the cameras and then puts them back up. And so the city, as you see here, had to send a cease and desist letter to Flock after that happened. And Evanston wasn't playing around. They said, we are going to cover the cameras while we wait for Flock to take them down again. So there are literally pictures in these articles of the cameras with trash bags and duct tape around them. So Evanston was not messing around. Austin has also ended their Flock contract. Another example is Denver, Sedona. I know there's another city that I saw just today ended their contract. I forget. So the momentum is growing for cities who are taking another look at these contracts and saying the way that these are being used, the massive amounts of data that we're collecting on our own residents is not in our city's interest. So, just to recap here, why, I'll be transparent, does the ACLU of Iowa believe that Iowa should hit the brakes on ALPRs? ALPRs are mass dragnet surveillance with no meaningful guardrails. And that data that's being collected is being stored with a private vendor. They collect and store data on all of us. And here at the ACLU, at least, we believe that fundamentally the government should not be tracking you unless it has an individualized suspicion of wrongdoing. It can't just track you all the time just in case. There's a high potential for misuse, abuse, and mistakes with this system. Most of the contracts we're seeing are being signed without community input, and we believe that at a minimum, at the base level, the community should have input in how it's being surveilled. And the door is open for further capacity expansions of these systems. As we've seen since the beginning of ALPR usage, that looks very different than how ALPRs operate and are being used today. And that's not going to stop. That evolution is going to continue. And once we open that door, we are having very little say over how our data is being used. So I promise we're not going to end on this down note here. I'm actually going to hand it over to Erica about what we can do about this, because there are really exciting things that we can do.
Thanks, Becca. So, having all of that information, enter our newest advocacy campaign, the Protect Our Privacy, Stop Government Surveillance campaign. The ACLU of Iowa believes that this is a really opportune moment to stand up against Flock's steamrolling across the state and the violations of privacy and civil liberties that are continuing to grow. Because as those things grow, as Becca was mentioning, we are seeing the momentum against the use of automatic license plate readers and people speaking out against them growing too. And we also know that this is not a partisan issue. I've talked to people all across the political spectrum about this, and it's concerning for everyone. It's really, at its heart, a civil liberties issue that impacts all of us. And we refuse to let flock safety determine the boundaries of our civil liberties and our freedom. So, this campaign is specifically targeting two main things here. First, we are working, why is that not showing up? There we go. First, we are targeting at the local level. We want to work with residents of Iowa cities, both who live in cities that already have flock safety contracts that are signed, and cities that don't have them yet, because we very well know that flock safety is using all of their venture capital money to go out and market to everyone. And all of these Iowa cities are hearing about how they should install flock safety cameras and become part of this camera network. And so we, as part of this campaign, want to empower people to be able to stand up and talk to their city council, talk to the decision makers in their communities about how to make sure that they know how dangerous these ALPR cameras are. I will say from our experience so far, a lot of the city officials who have installed these have no clue. They don't know what door that they have opened. And so making sure that people know how they can talk to their city councils and talk to the decision makers in those communities about this is really key. We'll be putting out a local advocacy toolkit on automatic license plate readers within the next couple of weeks, and we'll be sharing that out for folks to use and be putting out some trainings about those as well that folks can attend. The second prong here is on the state level. So this legislative session, the ACLU of Iowa is planning to advocate for statewide regulations on the use of automatic license plate reader systems. Because we know that we want cities to end their contracts, but individual cities ending their contracts is not enough. Especially because we know in a lot of places that will be an uphill battle. It's a battle worth fighting, but it's difficult to remove something that has already been placed. But we need statewide regulations so that Iowans are able to benefit from consistent protections for their privacy rights, and it doesn't matter what their zip code is to receive those protections. So, the goals of this campaign. First, we want to do some public education and mobilization. That's part of what we're doing here tonight. We know that this is something that has grown and changed so rapidly over the past few years. A lot of people are just not aware. They've never heard of flock safety. They've maybe seen these cameras around them and like, oh, that's weird, but don't know what they are and what they do. So an essential part of this is making sure that people know the danger that these cameras pose in their communities. Secondly, like I said before, we want to end contracts at the local level and make sure that Iowa cities are removing these cameras from their communities. And third, we want to pass some statewide regulation in order to limit the use of automatic license plate readers in our state. So, if you are interested in getting involved with this campaign, there are a few ways that you can do it in both prongs here. So first, on the local level, I mentioned that we will be releasing a local advocacy toolkit that will be coming out within the next week or two, and we encourage you to use it. We are also hosting trainings related to that toolkit, and we are also having trainings with what we call our Capital Corps program, which is Iowans who want to work with the ACLU of Iowa to talk to their state legislators directly about ACLU issues. So we will be holding some Capital Corps trainings before legislative session begins in January 2026 to make sure that folks feel equipped to talk about this issue with their legislators. If you're interested in getting involved with the campaign, please go talk to Francoise in the back. She is collecting signups for folks to get onto the mailing list for this campaign. You can also scan the QR code that's up here, and that will take you to a page that lists all of the events that are related to this campaign that we have coming up. So with that, that's the end of our presentation, but we will take questions, and I think they want us to take questions over here so we can both be mic'd. Thank you. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, you need the microphone.
I know, right?
Thanks so much for that. Just wondering if there's any research or anything done about flock cameras and biking.
And biking, what a fascinating question. Yeah.
Yes, which I love. I commute bike in Des Moines, and I must say I'm a little jealous of some of the infrastructure that you all have here.
I'm unaware of anything biking specific, but what I will say is some of the evolutions and the capabilities of the cameras is, for example, being able to type in, use a natural language search for example, white van with a ladder on top, and being able to search that way instead of just through the license plate. So theoretically, it's able to capture more than just the license plate number. So I'm not sure if, someone passing on their bike, if they're caught in a scan, might also be searchable like that. But that's what I know about so far. Thank you. That's a great question, though. I'll write that down to look into.
Hi. So in a situation like in North Liberty where, like, it was, I don't know if it was, you said North Liberty or Coralville, but where they sign the contract and then afterwards there's like public, like, outrage or whatever about them and like wanting to go back in the contract, how hard is it for them to get out of a contract that they've already signed?
Great question.
That's really good. It depends on the way the contract is written. So what we're recommending is generally the contracts, from what we've seen, auto-renew every about 2 years. So there's nothing that needs to be done to renew these contracts, which is an issue, we think. So it has to be proactively ended. So that's step one. That makes it harder to end. If you're trying to end the contract before that renewal date, it really depends on the language in the contract itself. There's kind of boilerplate contracts that are used, but some of them do differ. But it definitely makes it trickier if you're trying to do it before that auto renewal date.
Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one being, can you talk a little bit about the regulations you would like the state to implement? And the second, going back to one of your early slides about privacy being based on the idea that came out of Griswold, what happens if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Griswold?
So maybe I'll do that question first. So it doesn't just come from Griswold. The right to privacy has been interpreted as coming from multiple different sources. So if that does overturn, I'll say I'm not a lawyer. So, if our legal team's watching. So I don't think that it would disappear. Obviously, that would be concerning for a number of reasons if that was overturned. But that's a good question. And then on the regulations, was that, the statewide regulation?
What do you advocate?
Yeah. So really, it's come to Capitol Court trainings for specifics on this, but we're looking at different buckets that we have seen maybe other states be successful in regulation, or buckets that we believe we can get a good outcome in. So that looks like that data retention period, how long that data is kept for. That looks like how the data can be used. So putting regulations, say, on proactively what it can be used for and what it cannot be used for. There's, my mind is completely blanking on the rest of them right now, but those would be the main ones. Oh, and then requiring a warrant. There we go. That's the big one.
Hi, I've got 2 questions. I want to thank you, first of all, for your presentation, because I was completely unaware of the difference between ALPRs and traffic cameras.
Totally
You're
understandable.
not alone.
Because I had no idea. So my first question is, what kind of money are we talking about? How much does it cost a city like Coralville or Iowa City to get a contract? I'd be interested to know what the company that is getting most of the contracts is making. And then my second question is, these are city contracts, so are there ALPRs like on interstate highways? Are they on state highways? Or are they just within the confines, are they city boundaries? So are there counties or larger entities that are entering into these contracts?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes. I can take the second piece. And you can see some of this, the map graphic that was earlier in the slide deck of Iowa and the different locations where contracts have been signed. A couple of those do include counties. And so in those instances, I will say it has been more difficult to find the locations of some of the cameras that are part of county contracts, but in essence, those could be outside of city limits. They could be on highways and things like that. What was the first part of your question? Money. So, yes, I can. The specific example of Coralville, the contract they signed, I believe, was $36,000 annually, I believe. Or it was 2 years. Okay, so for a 2-year contract, $36,000. I will say that a big part of the marketing that Flock does to cities is sort of say, we can provide you with this very powerful technology a lot cheaper than you would be able to get it from anybody else. And part of the reason for that is, like Becca said before, the cameras are not the product. We are the commodity. Like Flock is getting to expand their camera network and expand their reach by getting into more cities. So it is more beneficial for Flock to offer cheaper technology to be able to get into more places with cities with lower budgets because they can expand their reach and expand their ability to expand the efficacy of their product per se and be able to say our network is however many thousands and thousands of cameras in thousands of places there are.
Okay, so that actually leads me to one further question. But if I somehow had a Flock password and I was searching the database, I'm searching a database not by geographic area. I'm just searching everything Flock has. Is that right? Or do you search by geographic area? And the reason I'm wondering is that if someone in LA can say, oh, I'm interested in tracking what people are doing in Virginia, do you know how they can track that? Or do they have to specify, I want to look at this geographic area? Or do they just say, here's a license plate number, I just want to go at it?
Mm-hmm.
Both. So you can, like in the example of the police officer in Texas who's used the ALPR system to track down this woman who had an abortion, used a specific license plate number to track down. And that then, is searching many different cameras all over the country to see if this license plate has popped up on any of those cameras. You can also search specific geographic areas, for example, outside a political rally. You can do a time scan to see which license plates have come in and out of that event. So there's multiple ways. Mm-hmm.
My question, I think, is a follow-up to that. What controls, if any, are there on who from higher up can access that data? You've been talking about other entities that have Flock contracts. They can access that data within their geographical area and perhaps throughout the country. What about those that don't even have Flock contracts but would be interested in that data?
So that's where we're seeing some of the workarounds. So, for example, in some of the cases where ICE has been able to access location information, it's because of an informal relationship of just asking someone to do them a favor, for example, to look up a license plate or look up a specific area or whatever. I want to kind of to this point, but there are a lot of, so if you start looking into this, you'll start seeing that different places have their own, what are sometimes called like usage policies. So they'll say, okay, and this was a big debate in Coralville too, of defining who's going to have access to the database within the Coralville Police Department, how they're going to share the data, what they're going to be allowed to use it for. For example, it has to be connected to an ongoing case or things like that. as a reason for being able to search the database. And what I want to say about those is that that only impacts that jurisdiction. That only holds that jurisdiction to account, and sometimes not even that. So, Iowa law only applies to Iowa. Those usage policies only apply to those jurisdictions where they are being used. So that means that you're at the mercy, really, of any other jurisdiction that has a contract that maybe doesn't have a usage policy. And it doesn't matter why they're looking something up, or they're going to track one license plate over many days, et cetera. So it really varies in the usage, and the workarounds to the way that the system has been built is really what we're concerned about. And there's not a great way to regulate that.
I will also add that something we've seen in some communities in Iowa, too, as Flock is marketing and trying to convince cities to sign contracts to get cameras installed. They have offered quote-unquote trial periods where they give the city's police department access to the network without actually installing cameras first. And so that is just another example of a way that there's really not a lot of public accountability and transparency around the use of the camera network.
Yeah, I just would like to know if you are making your presentations to the city councils and to, say, the supervisors and others who hold the power in our communities, if you have reached out to that. I know that in the city council and in these meetings, they will afford you a certain period of time, even with screen usage.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is definitely part of our plan. Part of what we're trying to do is train folks up locally so that they can make the ask first, because we found that it's often more compelling, especially if it's to a less receptive audience, if that request comes from a resident of that city. So that's part of our work in really making sure that folks know how to do this themselves, how to go to the city council meeting themselves. But we are also working directly with city councils to do that education, because sometimes folks just don't know what they've signed. And that frequently. So we're trying to tell folks, come to these local advocacy trainings, because you are doing a public service by educating your own city council members on this.
I have yet another question. So,
Please.
just a worst case scenario. Is there anything that prevents Flock from making a contract with a private entity?
No. Many private entities, in fact, do have Flock contracts.
So they have access to the database. Doesn't need to be a police department or any kind of public entity at all.
There's a little bit different of a wall if you're a private customer than if you are a government agency that's a customer. So if you're a private customer, often you need to opt in to sharing data with law enforcement. So that's kind of on a case-by-case basis, whether they do that. We don't know which private customers have done that, but we know that, for example, Lowe's and Home Depot are big customers of Flock. There's also, they really got their start kind of in HOAs as customers. So that is it's a data sharing piece, but it's not quite the same as if you're a government agency to another government agency. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
To what extent could a state get a contract with Flock? Say that again. To what extent could a state get a contract with Flock?
Yeah, so that would be like, for example, the state troopers getting a contract.
Like the Department of Corrections.
For any reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that there would be a barrier to that. don't quote me on, I'm going to follow up on this.
I mean, I think
Right.
this speaks to like part of the broader issue is that because Flock Safety is a private company, they can really do and contract with whomever they want with very little oversight and regulation because they are not accountable to the people they're surveilling the same way that a government entity might be and not have the same guardrails around it. So
Seems like some state governments would be very interested in this.
yeah.
Well, I very much appreciate this presentation, and like most of the people in this audience, I thought traffic cameras were the same thing as automatic license plate readers. I think as I hear you talking more and more, it's so important to continue your effort to educate the Iowa legislature, because we know a lot of things happen in Des Moines now that trickle down and affect home rule. And so I really hope you have a vigorous campaign on the Capitol Hill to protect our privacy.
Absolutely. That's the plan.
And one more.
Isn't this with the cameras for the cameras where they? Is this on?
Yeah. I think it's on. Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
The mission creep, you know, just from on the top of the traffic to avoid to understand the speed of a car, because in England they had CCTV during the period of time of the 80s when Margaret Thatcher, I think, was prime minister, and they were looking at people who the Irish Republican Army used to call in to say we planted a bomb there and it's going to go off, and people had to evacuate the buildings. But that could be anything, really. Once you start that, the mission creep is that you can go on, and sooner or later everything is being, because the state has a priority to protect its citizen, but as there's good use, there's also horrible abuse. So I think that this is really scary. And in schools, almost all our public schools, you're tracking the students.
Yeah. But I think that really speaks to the balance that we keep coming back to. How do we keep this balance between the people and the government, and so that the government doesn't have more power than the people there and isn't able to surveil them without checks? Because you're right that there is a responsibility to keep people safe. And at the same time, we have to maintain that balance. So yeah, I think that all that speaks to how scary it is when that balance gets out of whack.
Any more questions? Jean? No. Well,
Were there any questions online? I know they had mentioned that there
you're
could
right.
potentially be online questions.
Let me check with Bond. Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking about that. I join Kathleen, Susan, and everyone else in saying this has been very illuminating, and definitely something that I think all of us will be paying a lot more attention to. And one thing we want to do here is each of you get a league travel mug here for for coming out to talk with us. Give them a big hand again.
No, thank you. Thank you.